Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you this morning, and thank you for being here on this beautiful Lord's Day morning. We were really blessed, and we're glad to have this time to come together and study. We started a new study in this Sunday morning class, and the general theme is rules to live by. Rules to live by. Last week, we started with maybe one of the best-known such rules, the Golden Rule, was our study last week. This week is also a statement taken from the Sermon on the Mount, the so-called turn the other cheek principle. Let's look at that in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. Of course, Jesus is speaking here. This is the Sermon on the Mount. And here's this famous quote: "Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." So, turn the other cheek. I mean, that's an expression that probably almost everybody knows. I mean, if we went out on the streets of Columbia today and asked people if they had ever heard the expression, turn the other cheek, my guess is the vast majority of people have heard that. So it's a well-known expression, but I'm not sure it's always accurately understood. And that's what we want to do, of course, is try to get an accurate understanding of it. So the question guide asked, first of all, the ancient principle of justice, which entailed an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, seems somewhat brutal to us today. Was this law intended to make retaliation more severe, less severe, or equal to the wrong that had been done? All right, let's go to the statement of this rule in the book of Leviticus. Okay, so in our Old Testament, let's go to the book of Leviticus. Of course, Leviticus is the book of the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And under that law, we don't live under that law anymore. We live under the New Testament law of the Lord Jesus Christ. But under the law of Moses, in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 17, "He that killeth any man shall surely be put to death, and he that killeth a beast shall make it good, beast for beast. And if a man cause a blemish in his neighbor, as he hath done, so shall it be done to him. Breach for breach, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he hath caused a blemish in a man, so shall it be done to him again." All right, now the thing that, and we just recently talked about this, but the thing that we really want to point out is this was the civil law of the nation of Israel. This was never intended to be a license for personal vengeance. God has never allowed people to take personal vengeance. This expression has been widely misused to suggest we can do that. You knock my tooth out, I'll knock your tooth out. I'll do to you as you've done to me. I'll get back at you. You better not mistreat me. I'll get back at you. I'll get even with you. I'll do worse. In fact, I'll do worse to you than you did to me. That's sort of the rule of the world, isn't it? And the world looks for justification to seek personal vengeance. God has never allowed that. This was the civil law of the land. And so if you harmed a person, this was specifying that you should be punished for the harm you caused, but it's not saying that, so you knocked my tooth out. This is not saying that I should be allowed to knock your tooth out. This is saying that the law that pertains to that is that a person should be punished in kind. To the offense that he has caused, he should be punished in kind, but it's not saying that I, the initial victim, should even be the one who administers that penalty. And so this has been a broadly misused notion, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Even under the law of Moses, that was never a justification for personal vengeance. But the fact of the matter is that the people in Jesus' day, the Jews of Jesus' day, had used it that way. And they had abused the principle, and they were allowing the justification for personal vengeance. And that's really what Jesus is teaching against here in the Sermon on the Mount in our text in Matthew chapter 5. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Jesus is saying, you've heard the people say this, and you know how it's been abused. You know the notion has been perverted to suggest personal vengeance. And then he goes on to state a higher, more noble standard that we should live by. So, understand that Jesus wasn't just echoing the law of Moses here. He was addressing the Jewish perversions of the law, and he was saying that the rule of his kingdom would be a higher standard. We'd live by a more noble notion than what the Jews had perverted the law of Moses to teach. Tom?
Going back to when it was even when they came into the land of Canaan, there were these cities of refuge that were set up. That if something happened, you could flee to that city of refuge, and you weren't supposed to be persecuted for that. But that didn't remove the situation, because then you were brought before the judges of the thing, and they were determined on it. And if you found guilty in it, you still suffered the thing. It wasn't all free for all to get in. It was a means of keeping justice in place, that you weren't punished for something that wasn't.
Until you were convicted of it.
Yeah.
Before you were convicted, yeah.
And you might think, well, I've got access to the city of refuge. That city of refuge didn't give you carte blanche to where you just, you can live there forever and not do anything.
Yeah.
It still had ramification of it. You had to be judged. You had to be follow the other laws of Moses to go through and get a righteous judgment.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's understand then here our text in Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is dealing with Jewish perversions of the law. They weren't accurately applying the law of Moses. And he is actually saying he's calling us to a higher standard in which we don't seek personal vengeance, that we actually allow ourselves to be misused in certain ways. We'll talk about that. He suggests that the context here goes on. So notice verse 39, which we already read. Whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not away. And so, all of this context is about the idea of retaliation, personal vengeance is the whole context here. And so, you have to think that every one of these examples that he cites is in the idea of someone who's trying to misuse you. Someone sues you for your coat. The contextual notion here is that they're not treating you right. That they should not be suing you for your coat, but don't resist that. Yield. Give him your cloak also. Someone compels you to go a mile. I understand that in that time, a Roman citizen, a soldier, or even any other Roman citizen could come up to a Jew, because the Romans were occupying that land at the time. And a Roman could just say to a Jew, carry my bags, carry my luggage, carry this stuff. And they could require a Jewish person to go and go a set distance. The rule only allowed them to require you to go so far. And Jesus and the Jews hated that, of course. They hated that they were under that kind of oppressive regime. But Jesus is saying, go with them 2 miles. If they say go 1, you go 2. Don't resist. Don't retaliate. Don't try to get even. Just yield to that sort of. It's not a violent form of mistreatment. It's a mistreatment. It's an oppression. Jesus said, don't resist that. Give in to that. And then he says, give to him that asketh thee, from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. So someone is, and again, the context of this would suggest this is not a righteous thing. They're asking you to give when it probably isn't even a fair, just request. Again, don't and you got to get the idea that this was sort of a demand that you give something. That all of this context is people putting something on you that's not fair. So you have to think that that's the gist of this kind of request. And he says, don't resist that either. Now understand that every one of these instructions is mitigated by other things in the Scripture. For instance, this last one: if a man asks you to give, turn not away. Well, we actually are supposed to, right? 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10 says that if a man won't work, neither should he eat. So I've got this guy who won't work and he asks me for money. I'm not supposed to give him money, right? So these principles are mitigated by other standards. The context then is talking about personal vengeance. It's talking about retaliation. That's all of this is in that context. Turn the other cheek, give him your cloak, go 2 miles, give to the one who's asking. All of that is in this general context. In this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about personal vengeance or retaliation. And he's saying, don't do that. He's calling us to this high standard where we don't try to get even. Okay? I think that's the principle being set forth. Thoughts or comments here? Karen?
Even if somebody didn't believe that part in the Old Testament about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, it says that it is 19:18, you shall not take vengeance. It goes on to say that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think it's so important for us to remember God never allowed people to do that. Even under the old law or the law we live by, God never allowed personal vengeance taking. I think that's exactly right.
In those concepts he's doing contrast. Like, somebody hauls off and backhands you on one side of the face. When you take and turn your other thing to it, that gets into thinking. It's a thought process. Well, why is he doing that?
Why is he not resisting me?
Why is he not resisting me?
Yeah.
And it's sort of a working of changed heart in things. And every one of these things is that concept. Yeah, you can do it. He's sort of expecting you to get up and swing back at him, but when you don't,
this is actually, and I want to talk a little bit more about this later because there's a question later about self-defense. And I want to talk about that. But this is a taunt. He's not causing you harm or injury. He's taunting you. He's trying to get you to escalate to a higher level. And all of this whole context, Jesus said, step it back, step down. Don't engage. Don't let this thing escalate to a higher confrontation. And I want to talk about that. This verse always comes up in a question about self-defense, and I want to hold that for just a minute. We'll get to that. JD?
Real brief point, just when you think about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you have to think about this is something that was authorized, but who was it authorized for? Civil authorities.
Yeah.
So the same way today that if someone, murdered a friend of ours, we can't go and then murder that person, but we can certainly, help the police identify who that person is. They can be put on trial, found guilty, and the civil authorities can put that person to death because God has given them that authority, but he hasn't given us.
Exactly.
So just many other things in the Bible, God has given authority, but sometimes it's only for certain people in certain situations. And you have to ask yourself, here is an authorization, who is authorized to do it?
I think you're exactly right. Well said. I think that's right. Okay, so the author suggests that the principles being set forth here are incorporated in the notion of meekness, M-E-K-N-E-S-S, meekness. So he says, rather than a bullish, belligerent attitude, we should be meek. What is our typical definition of meekness? We're to be meek. What's the typical definition of that? So, strength under control. In other words, you're strong, but you've got it under control. Versus, I'm bigger, I'm meaner than you. If you hit me, I can hit you harder than you can hit me. kind of thing. So strength under control, I think, is the way that we have always defined, and I think accurately defined, the word meekness. Look in Numbers, kind of an interesting statement about Moses that we often reference. Numbers 12, verse 3. Numbers 12, verse 3 says, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth." So Moses demonstrated great meekness, more than anybody else of his time. And yet you think about Moses going in and confronting Pharaoh, and not backing down when Pharaoh resisted him. You think about Moses leading the children of Israel who were so rebellious in their very nature, and yet he led them faithfully. So Moses was not a weakling. Moses was no milquetoast kind of a guy. Moses was a powerful character, but he had it under control. So meekness, I think a good way to remember it is meekness is strength under control. Now, with that in mind, he references some verses that urge us to be meek. Matthew 5:5. Matthew 5:5, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The expression "inherit the earth" there is a proverbial expression among the Jews. It simply meant to be blessed. In the Old Testament, of course, they had been promised the land of Canaan. And so it became a proverbial expression among the Jews in Old Testament times. Inherit the earth meant, or inherit the land. Sometimes it's even translated that way. It was a proverbial expression of the Jews to mean be blessed in general. And that's what this means here. This is the way Jesus is using the expression in Matthew 5:5. "Blessed are the meek, for they will be blessed." They will inherit the earth. They will be blessed. So meekness is enjoined upon us. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. "Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, support the weak, be patient toward all men. See that none render evil for evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men." Notice, render to no man evil for evil. That's in line with what we're talking about here, right? No retaliation, no personal vengeance. Titus 3, verse 2. Titus 3:2 says, "Speak evil to no man, be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness to all men." So I think that's pretty straightforward. So I'll tell you, somebody mistreats you. I don't know if you're like me, but I can feel my blood pressure rising. Someone does something, that I feel is undeserved toward me. They say or do something offensive. Can you sort of feel your blood pressure rising? Sort of the blush coming over your face. Oh yeah, that makes me mad. And so what do I do when I'm in that situation where someone has really, they just done me wrong. They just mistreated me. I'm going to get even with them. I'll tell you, they'll be sorry they ever said that. They'll be sorry they ever did that. No. Back off. Tone it down. Don't escalate. Don't inflame the situation by the reaction you give to it, right? That's what Jesus is teaching here. And that's what these other Bible verses are teaching us to do. If everybody in the world lived by those kinds of principles, well, wouldn't the world be a wonderful place? Instead, what do we see in our world today? We see people becoming increasingly violent in their reactions, right? I mean, you cross somebody just in the slightest way and you're liable to get all kinds of horrible reaction. We picture the road rage kind of scenery. So I made a mistake. I changed lanes and I didn't have enough clearance to change lanes. That guy behind me in that lane I was switching into, he had to swerve a little. He had to hit his brakes. He didn't like that. So now he's going to get even with me. even to the extent now that sometimes we hear on the news about he pulls out a gun and starts shooting at me because I made a mistake. I switched lanes in front of him when I shouldn't have. That's the kind of situation that exists in our world today. And we can't be like that, right? Obviously we can't shoot a gun at somebody in traffic. But I'm just saying we cannot overreact to provocation. The world does. People of the world do. We can't. Jesus is calling us to a higher level. Any thoughts or comments? All right. Another passage on meekness, the wisdom of meekness, James 3. Look at James chapter 3, beginning verse 13. James 3:13, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. I think that's really interesting that the expression there is the meekness of wisdom. So if you are wise, it will produce in you this meekness of character that the Lord wants us to have. So, that guy cut me off in traffic, and man, I just had to let him have it. At the next stoplight, I rolled down my window and I shouted at him, and I was ugly and mean, and then it went on. Then he pulled away and I pulled away. What became of that? Nothing. It didn't do any good, right? If I was wise, if I had demonstrated wisdom in that scenario, then I would have meekly let it go. There's no use escalating that. There's no value added by me shouting at him at the next stoplight. I didn't gain anything by doing that. I just made myself look stupid, right? Instead of demonstrating wisdom and just let that go, I looked dumb when with a red face and a loud voice, I shouted at that guy for having cut me off in traffic. I didn't gain anything by that. He certainly didn't gain anything by that. And if I ever had... So, turns out that I was on my way to church, and when I pulled in the parking lot, there's that guy. He's visiting church services today. How do you think my example stands now? How well do you think that comes... It doesn't work, right? The meekness of wisdom, being smart about things, causes us to react in a meek way. Wade?
I remember several years ago, my dad and mom, or my dad was still alive, they were down in a town, and I think they hit this girl or something, I can't remember. It wasn't a big thing. It was they bumped into her car or something. Their mom was there with her. I think I'm telling this right. And they got out and they was just really mean to mom. I mean, of course, my mom and dad were elderly, and they were just really mean until they found out that they were a member of the church and where they went to church at. And then they realized that there was a connection, and then all that calmed down because that turned out to be the wife of the preacher.
So, but talk about hurting your influence. It's already done, right? It's already done. You can't, as they say, you can't unring the bell. You can't unspeak the words. If you do that, it's already out there. Now, you can apologize, but you can't, it's not the same. JD?
We should obviously do this stuff because it's just the right thing to do, but I think a lot of times if you're struggling with it, one thing you can tell yourself that helps is if you're thinking through the ways I could react to this, which way is going to make me have a better day?
Yeah.
And so I know, like, if you get off into being really upset and mad and, negativity,
it does affect the whole rest of the day.
Right. So if you're just like, man, I don't know what that guy was thinking, wish that hadn't happened. Oh well, everybody's fine. Let's move on.
Doesn't matter. It really, in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter. You know, the provocations that we tend to react to, in the big scheme of things, don't matter at all. And so we need to remember that. The meekness of wisdom. Let's all try to remember that expression. Wisdom causes us to act meekly. Not milk toast, but under control. Wisdom causes us to be under control. Paul?
I can relate to this because that actually happened to me. I was in one of my bigger trucks in town at an intersection, and a member of the church that I was attending at the time gestured to me because they didn't like how I was parked, or not parked, but I was at a turn lane.
Yeah.
Anyway, that changed how I felt about that person.
Sure.
Now, I forgave him,
Yeah.
but am I wrong for not letting it kind of go? You know what I'm saying? 'Cause now, every time I think of that person, that's the very first thing I think about. Is that mental, I have that, it's like a Polaroid
Yeah.
of him doing that to me.
I don't think it's, I mean, that's just reality. If I cussed you out today, and even if I said, Paul, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and you forgave me, you don't, the fact of the matter is, you remember that I had that bad character trait, and so it does change things. There are consequences to misdeeds, and some of the consequences of our misdeeds is we hurt our reputation, we hurt our influence, and that's just the way it is. And now that might, you know, over time I might be able to restore your opinion of me, but it's not going to happen instantaneously. Kelly?
I've got two comments. One, don't you think it helps when if we keep in mind that it's not our place to hold someone accountable? That's
God's the judge. Always remember God's the judge.
And then second, could you discuss how we put that practice in our daily lives? Like when someone takes advantage of us, I mean, do we just kind of be a doormat, so to speak, and allow people to...
I think this is a good question. So Kelly, some of you wouldn't be able to hear that. She's asking, so if someone mistreats me, is this telling me to just be a doormat? In other words, this person mistreated me, and if I stay connected in this relationship, they're probably going to mistreat me over and over and over again because that's the kind of person they are. Obviously, I'm not going to escalate the situation. I think that's the principle being set forth in our study this morning. Don't escalate the situation. But I don't think there's anything in the Word of God that would require us to continue to allow someone to just beat us down. I don't have to, you know, I can, it's not, so this person, every time they do that, they're sinning every time they do that. And if I stay and don't distance myself from that situation, I'm just accommodating them to sin over and over and over again, right? So I don't think godly principles would say you just got to let yourself be the doormat and they're going to walk on you every time they get a chance. I think we can take measures to distance ourselves from the situation so that doesn't repeatedly happen. Thoughts on that, anybody? Tom?
The situation, God brings to the children of Israel, there's time and time again that they just ignored what God had to say and did things their way or whatever. And there were times that God came to the point where he just wanted to wipe them out. And, Moses had to, sit and plead with him on doing so. It shows that, that sort of characteristic. God's in that ultimate judgment. He's the creator. He made the things. He can do with it what he wants. We're not in that situation. And, but God can still take and have that softness to turn around and change, to give people a second chance.
Okay.
And does it. But he moves on. And we see, things like that with parables that Jesus taught through various different situations.
Okay. I think that's right. To your question, Kelly, I would add into the mix the principle of, still in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7, verse 6, give not that which is holy to the dogs, neither cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rend you. So there's still in the Sermon on the Mount, there's a principle, you don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's not working. right? And you don't cast your pearls before swine. Wade?
Back to your, one of the things that you said earlier about, you know, the guy that cut him off and now he's trying to be, you know, I hear people sometimes brag about that.
I let him have it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's a notch in their belt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, it just seems to me that, and people, actually when people brag about those things, you'll hear other people join in and kind of say, oh yeah, you know, glad you let that guy, you know. And I mean, people just don't understand. That's the way the world is becoming. I mean, even people that actually claim to be Christian, you know, or denominational, they still are, and even members of the church, I would think too, are even still trying to get involved in that and pump those people up. But we shouldn't be doing that.
I think our world, I think our media, I think entertainment sources all teach violent reaction. And people are becoming increasingly violent by the influences of our culture, and it's just wrong. And we got to avoid that. And I think that's a big challenge for us, actually. Real quickly, we're going to run out of time, and we got to get to this self-defense question. I thought question 6 in the study guide was interesting. What are some of the ways that a Christian is tempted to respond when evil is done to him? Evil for evil. In other words, so this guy, maybe he did something really bad to me, and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do exactly the same thing he did, but I'm going to get even with him. I'm going to talk behind his back. I'm going to gossip about him. I'm going to be bitter, and every chance I get, I'm going to rudely assault him. There's just, you know, so I'm never going to come to blows, right? We're just not fisticuffs kind of people. I won't hit him in the jaw. I think he deserves it, actually. I'd like to hit him in the jaw. I'm not going to hit him in the jaw, but I'll do some other things, you know, a little more under the radar. I'm going to be bitter and resentful against him. I'm going to talk behind his back. I'm going to gossip about him. I'm going to try to run him down. I'm going to try to get other people against him. Those are the things that we typically do, isn't it? Or at least we're tempted to do. Kyle?
It's a good point. Romans 12:20 talks about if your enemy's hungry, feed him. And if he's thirsty, give him a drink, and doing so you heap burning coals on his head. So that should be our knee-jerk reaction, is to be merciful and be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great text. Kyle mentions Romans 12, beginning at verse 17. Romans 12:17, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire in his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. That's the high calling, isn't it? That's the high standard. But I do think it's interesting, and we often point out verse 18, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. In other words, if it's up to me, we're going to be at peace. But it's not all up to me, right? The other guy in the relationship has something to say about that too. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Sometimes it's just not possible. And it's not because of us, it's because of them or him or her. They won't let it be so. And that's just reality. But even at that, we can't avenge ourselves. And as Kelly said, God is the ultimate judge. God will make things right. Okay, real quickly, because we're going to run out of time if we don't get to this. And you've got to talk about this. When you're talking about turn the other cheek, the author asks, number 9, does turning the other cheek preclude us from defending ourselves against physical violence, material exploitation, other offenses? Does turning the other cheek preclude us from finding the address of the person who wronged us and going down there to punch him in the... Yeah, it does. It does preclude us from that. We can't hunt him down and punch him in the nose. But what about this? What about this self-defense? I'm sure, and some of you may feel this way, and I certainly respect your conscience in the matter. I know people, I know good brethren who used this text that we started out with this morning in Matthew chapter 5. Resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. There is this position called pacifism. In other words, we can take no physical action, even in self-defense. We must be completely passive. We can't defend ourselves. And this is a favorite proof text of those who conscientiously take that position. Now, I want to make clear, we want to respect the conscience of everybody. And if you conscientiously feel that you cannot act in self-defense, don't violate your conscience. You got to honor your conscience in all things. But this verse is not teaching against self-defense. I want to be pretty clear about this. This verse is not teaching a prohibition on acting in self-defense. Now, a couple of things about that will help us understand it this way. Notice it says, if a man shall smite, whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek. This is King James, he smites me on the right cheek. All newer versions are going to use the word slap. He's going to slap you on the right cheek. Well, a slap is not inflicting bodily harm typically, right? A slap is not, he didn't say a man tries to knock you out with a baseball bat. He didn't say that. He said if a man slaps you. Well, a slap is a taunt, right? It's an insult. And it's a provocation. This guy is trying to get us to escalate to a higher level. An old preacher once made a point that I've never heard anybody else make, but I think it's really a good one. Notice, whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek. Okay, think about this and see if you think it's a worthy argument. Most people are right-handed, right? So if I'm going to come up to Joel and smite him or slap him on his right cheek, that's his right cheek, right? And if I'm right-handed, the only way I can slap him on the right cheek is to backhand him like that, right? That's the only way I could slap him on the right cheek is to hit him with a backhand. And that very much suggests the idea of a taunt or an insult, a provocation, trying to get someone to escalate this to a higher level, right? And Jesus' teaching here is back away, don't escalate, back it down, tone it down, don't let this move up. So he slapped me. He's trying to get me into a fight. I'm not going to fight that. And it's not because I think I couldn't whip the guy. Maybe I could whip the guy. Maybe I'm bigger than him. Maybe I'm stronger than him. It's not a question of physical strength or who could beat who in an all-out brawl. It's a question of, am I going to be provoked or not? And Jesus is saying, don't let yourself be provoked. Don't let this escalate. Don't try to retaliate. Back it down, okay? So I really think that's the right understanding of this turn the other cheek business. If he's insulting me and taunting me, I'm not going to let that happen. If he wants to, I'll let him slap me on the other cheek if he wants to, because I'm not going to let this escalate into an all-out brawl, right? That's what Jesus is teaching here. I honestly believe that this text has nothing to do with the question of self-defense. Now, that's a broader question in and of itself. This text does not address that question at all. Tom?
You think about Jesus in the garden and Peter coming up and drawing his sword and cutting off the servant of the high priest's ear. Jesus didn't tell him, Peter, you didn't have any right to bring that sword here. He just made the statement, if you're going to live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. He didn't say you can't have a sword. Otherwise, he would taught his disciples not even to carry the sword. They carried the sword for self-defense and various things like that. So he wasn't condemned to that. But in this situation, he's going through it. You start living that way, you're going to die that way.
Well, I think that's probably a true statement. That in other words, if you're a violent person, you're going to experience violence. I think that's true. And the Lord is calling us to not be violent people. Dan?
How do those people reconcile Luke 22 at the end of
What's the verse? Luke 22 what?
22 is very, well, 36 through all the way going to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, we don't have time to read all that, but he said, he that hath a purse, let him take it. Likewise a scrip. He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. I also don't think that necessarily goes to the self-defense question. I mean, you would have used a sword for lots of things because they were going to be out. They're going to be camping out lots of nights. You might use it to gather firewood. You might use it to protect yourself from wild beasts. There might be a lot of uses for a sword. But I don't think that passage necessarily addresses the self-defense question either. You might have a sword for a lot of reasons, not necessarily, but potentially self-defense. But I don't think that you could argue self-defense from that text necessarily. And really, the purpose of our lesson is not to necessarily address the self-defense question so much as to simply say the turn the other cheek statement is not a prohibition against self-defense. If you wanted to know the verse where I would hang my hat on self-defense, in Matthew 24, I think this maybe makes as good an argument as anywhere. Matthew 24, verse 43. Matthew 24, 43. Know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. I think that verse, as well as any in the New Testament, teaches it's right to defend yourself and your property from those who would do harm. That's a whole broader study and a whole broader question, but if I was going to make my case, I'd probably start there and go beyond that. But again, the main point that I want to emphasize, because it is our theme of our study this morning, turn the other cheek. The principle of turn the other cheek is do not allow yourself to be provoked. Demonstrate the meekness of wisdom. Don't let it be escalated. Back down, step away. Don't be provoked into a broader fight. Don't react violently. Don't seek personal vengeance or retaliation. That's the turn the other cheek principle. I don't think it has anything to do with the bigger, and a serious question for sure, but the bigger self-defense question I don't think is in that verse at all. Thoughts or comments, anybody? Real quickly, he mentions one other text. Let's go first. We're just out of time. 1 Corinthians 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 1. Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unjust and not before the saints? Do ye not know that the saints shall judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, are ye unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If ye then have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. I speak to your shame. Is it so that there's not a wise man among you? No, not one that shall be able to judge between his brethren. But brother goeth to law with brother, and that before the unbelievers. Now therefore there is utterly a fault among you, because ye go to law one with another. Why do you not rather take the wrong? Why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? Nay, you do wrong and defraud, and that your brethren. So I think the author threw this verse in. Of course, there were lots of problems in the church at Corinth. And one of the problems in the church at Corinth was they were suing each other in civil courts. They were taking their matters before unbelievers to judge between two brothers. And Paul's condemning them for that. But notice the principle. Appoint a judge among you. Take anybody in the church and let them be an intermediary. Let them be a determiner of who should get what and how this should go. So there in verse 4 he says, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. But especially verse 7. Why do you not take the wrong? Why do you not rather take the wrong? Why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? You know, as we were saying earlier, in the big picture of things, most of these issues that we get so wound up about, most of these issues are really petty and insignificant. You know, a month from now, it won't seem to matter at all. A month from now, you'll probably feel bad that you got so worked up about that. It wasn't that important. suffer the wrong. Allow yourself to be defrauded. Don't just, I'm going to defend myself. No, that guy's going to be sorry he ever crossed me, buddy. Don't be that way. JD?
Maybe the accountant way to look at things here that I am, but a lot of times I think things, people think, they say time is money. When you talk about the guy who cut you off in traffic or this thing or the other, if you will add up the time that you spent just angry and all the productivity that you lost throughout the day, it cost you so much value that you could have added to your life.
Peace of mind and
in my mind, it's easy. It helps to keep in mind what winning is, and so winning is to keep myself on an even plane where I can be productive throughout the day and not blow up at somebody.
I think it's a great point. Great point. Thanks, everybody.